Hello everyone. At the end of the last lesson, we were speaking about what is it that makes the men of the Great Assembly so great. And we said that the Gemara in Yoma asked the question, where Yehoshua ben Levi says, why were they called the men of the Great Assembly? Because they restored the crown to its ancient glory. Moshe had said, Hakel HaGadol HaGibor Norah, the great, mighty, awesome God. But Jeremiah had taken the awe when he saw the temple destroyed. And Daniel had taken away the might when he saw Am Yisrael enslaved. Now, how exactly did the men of the Great Assembly return these things? The Gemara answers that question. They said, on the contrary, his might is found in the fact that he suppresses his wrath from punishing the wicked. Interesting. Might becomes holding back. Now, this is the beginning of what I'm going to call and develop as the theology of exile. It's a very big problem posed to the world with the destruction of the temple and the end of the prophetic era. Where is the voice of God? Where is his action in the world? The angry Old Testament God who will punish and reward. Well, say the men of the Great Assembly, if you want to see God's action, look for the fact that the wicked, and I believe that they're actually speaking about us, that God is tolerant of our misdeeds, waiting for us to return, because what could be mightier than patience? Furthermore, they say that the Gemara says that they return this notion of awe. And let's remember that awe is essentially the experience of the greatness of God. Right? That used to be the temple. But Jeremiah, when he saw it destroyed, took the word out of his praise of God. And the men of the Great Assembly will return it by saying a very simple thing. Where is his awe? Well, if it weren't for the fear of God, how is it possible that Israel could survive amongst the nations? They argue that the chief demonstration of the existence of God in the world will no longer be the temple or the prophet speaking in his voice. It will be the very survival of Am Yisrael. And what we're going to begin this week is the tale of that survival in the face of different cultures. Now, in order to do that properly, I want to give a very brief nod to world history. Let's remember that we're using the standard secular dating system despite the complications in its relationship to Seder Olam and the rabbinic tradition. I'm doing this in order that you can cross-reference as you're searching for further knowledge. Nevertheless, the overlap in our time period of the Men of Great Assembly is with classical Greece. Now, a few things to understand about classical Greece, that the city-state is the primary structure of political organization. In fact, the word political comes from the word polis, which means the city-state. Right? This means that there's a notion of people who participate in the cultural political discourse and people who do not. And this is how the Greeks will relate to the whole world. Furthermore, the Greeks, right before we encounter them, have gone through two important processes. One is the Persian Wars. This is the breaking away of Greece from the larger ruling culture, Persia at the time, very similar to what's happening to Am Yisrael in its day. Right? This is the Persian Wars is where Herodotus, if you recall our first historian from our introductory lessons, Herodotus will cut his teeth on the question of history in his understanding of the Persian Wars. Right? Next phase will be the consolidation of the Peloponnesus, of the Greek peninsula, into one, I wouldn't call it unified, but let's just call it mostly homogeneous culture. And the Peloponnesian Wars will be where Thucydides really launches the endeavor of Greek philosophy by arguing that critical tests of knowledge are not only possible, but essential. The skepticism of received tradition and the distinction that he will draw between the literary truth of Homer and the literal truth of Greek philosophy. Because the world is now emerging from the mythic age and entering for the Greeks into the philosophical age. That, in a nutshell, is the path that the Greeks will take out of their classical era. Now, Hellenistic Greece will truly begin, it's a bit of an argument with Alexander the Great, but I want to take a little step back from that. In 386, Plato will found his academy. Now, to discuss Platonic philosophy right now is just simply not within the scope of our endeavor. Nevertheless, it's important to understand that the major concern of philosophy is understanding existence. And the Greeks will struggle very deeply with how one can relate to existence beyond material experience. And Plato will offer one of the pathways in doing that, in the sense that there are ideals, what we would call divine ideals, which indeed his student Aristotle will call divine ideals, right? Ideals which are expressed in a manifest reality. This dualism between reality and experience will on one hand speak very deeply to the rabbis, and the other hand will cause many problems, as we'll see down the line in the story of Hanukkah. So Plato founds his academy in 386, and his chief student, Aristotle, will have a young royal follower, student, admirer by the name of Alexander. Alexander the Great. Right? Alexander the Great will begin his conquest, and as I said, I cannot describe to you his entire progress, but he will begin his conquest, and he will reach Egypt in 333, and there he will found the city of Alexandria and its famous library. I only mention that now as a time marker so that we can know two things. First of all, Alexandria will return again and again in our story, so remember it, and its library, and that quest, that thirst for knowledge that characterized Hellenistic Greek culture. And number two, that less than a year later, perhaps, Alexander found himself in Jerusalem. Why do I say perhaps? Well, the historians will tell us he never went to Jerusalem. He conquered Tyre, and he worked his way down to Gaza, and then on. But the Gemara, the sages, and Josephus, the famous historian of the Second Temple period, will both tell us a story. And as I've told you, the Greeks will make the distinction between the literal and the literary in their pursuit of objective truth. But the Torah has an internal truth which it is trying to articulate, and therefore, whatever tools will work in order to aid our understanding of the truth are true. Now, either way you look at it, this is how the Gemara tells the story. Shimon HaTzaddik, Shimon the Righteous, was amongst the last members of the Great Assembly. That's what the second Mishnah in Pirkei Avot will tell us. And we're not going to speak right now about what his teaching was, but the Gemara asks a very interesting question in Yoma. Is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, which Shimon HaTzaddik was in his day, is he allowed to wear the 8 garments, the Shmona Megadim, the beautiful headdress and the breastplate and the robes? Is he allowed to wear them outside of the temple? Interesting question. Why would we care? We'll leave aside why we care. It's a question, it's a technical, halakhic question. But the Gemara gives a fascinating answer. It says, well, we know that Shimon HaTzaddik once did. When did he do such a thing? When Alexander came to conquer Eretz Yisrael. He made an alliance with the Shomronim, the Samaritans. These are the peoples who previously in our story wanted to join with the Jews in rebuilding the temple in the time of Ezra and were rejected by Zerubbabel. We said that at that point was the origin of the hatred of Am Yisrael due to their insistence on being Am Yisrael. So now these Samaritans who assisted Alexander in his conquest of Tyre demand as their reward the destruction of the Jews. And the Gemara says Alexander, at the head of his army, marches on the temple. He's coming up the road from Jaffa. Now imagine, they say that Alexander was enormously tall, that he would find the tallest horse he could to ride, and that he wore full armor and a 3-foot plume on his head, 13 feet of handsome Greek, with his entire army arrayed behind him. And out from the temple comes Shimon HaTzaddik, Shimon the Righteous, in his 8 garments, says the Gemara, followed by the priests in white carrying torches. What a beautiful scene. They meet on the road, and the Shomronim are behind Alexander. They say, that's it, that's the Jews, get him, get him, get him. And what does Alexander do? He descends from his horse and bows to the ground. The Shomronim say, what are you doing? This is the Jew. We sent you to destroy these people. You're not supposed to bow to him. What are you doing? And he says, this is the face that I saw in my dreams that told me that I would be a conqueror. And then the story changes, and the Jews ask for 2 things: vengeance on their enemies, and to be left alone to pursue their tradition. It's an interesting story that bears a lot of reflection. By the way, if you look closely both at Josephus' version and the version in the Gemara in Yoma, you'll see the literary masterful nature of the sages. But that aside, what I'm interested in is that question of beauty and holiness. See, the Gemara originally asks, is the Kohen Gadol allowed to wear the Shmona Begadim, the 8 garments, outside of the place of holiness? We don't question, says the Gemara, that beauty must serve holiness. In fact, in its extreme expression, that which is holy will be beautiful, and the converse, which is not holy, cannot be truly beautiful. On the other hand, we know from Hellenistic cultures that the Greeks placed a high value on beauty, that the sense of the aesthetic, right, the sense of the ability to experience wholeness will be one of their primary access points to anything beyond material experience, what we would call holiness. So it is a question: does beauty serve holiness, or does holiness emerge from beauty? Now the contact point there on the road to Jerusalem will be beauty. The 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol, Alexander the Great on his war horse and his 3-foot high plume. And when they meet, it indeed will be love at first sight. the sages will be enamored of another culture whose pursuit of truth is genuine, who brings to bear on that pursuit all of the powers they have, and who offers so much beauty. It will only be as the cultures begin to mingle and the sages begin to sense that in our culture, beauty serves holiness, but in theirs, if there's holy at all, it must emerge from the beautiful, that there is indeed a conflict on the horizon.